Today's topic is something we all silently crave, yet few fully master: how to never get angry or bothered by anyone. While the idea sounds idealistic, the methods to achieve it are rooted in psychology, discipline, and a refined mindset. Let's begin with a fundamental principle: emotional detachment. Emotional detachment, when understood correctly, is not about being cold, indifferent, or heartless. Rather, it is a conscious, highly intelligent decision to not let external events or the behaviors of others dictate your inner state. It's about stepping back mentally and emotionally from situations that have the potential to disturb your peace and drain your energy. In a world where emotional reactivity is normalized and even celebrated, cultivating emotional detachment is an advanced skill, one that creates a powerful shift in your experience of daily life. The first step in understanding emotional detachment is recognizing the distinction between feeling an emotion and being ruled by that emotion. Emotions are natural responses. We all get frustrated, disappointed, or hurt from time to time. These are not signs of weakness, but when those emotions take over, when they cloud judgment, provoke unnecessary reactions, or linger far longer than the situation deserves, then you've moved from feeling the emotion to being controlled by it. Emotional detachment allows you to pause, acknowledge the feeling, and then decide whether or not it deserves your full mental investment. For example, imagine someone makes a passive-aggressive remark in a meeting. The emotionally attached person internalizes the comment, replays it for hours, and perhaps even changes their behavior in response. The emotionally detached person registers the comment but evaluates it logically. Does this matter? Is it worth my energy? What does this say about them, not me? This creates space between the stimulus and the response, and that space is where self-control lives. One of the most common misconceptions is that detachment is a form of avoidance. On the contrary, detachment requires a greater level of awareness than reacting impulsively. It means you are not avoiding conflict or pretending to be unaffected. You are simply choosing to process situations with clarity rather than emotional noise. This is especially important in relationships, where emotional entanglement can often lead to miscommunication, manipulation, or emotional exhaustion. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care intelligently. Now consider this: many of us carry emotional baggage from unresolved experiences, past criticisms, childhood conditioning, societal pressure, and we often project this onto current situations. Emotional detachment asks you to clean that lens. Every time someone triggers you, ask yourself, what part of me is reacting right now? Is this about the person in front of me, or is it about an old wound being touched? When you get honest about your triggers, you become less reactive, because you're not blindly responding, you're examining. To strengthen emotional detachment, it helps to view people and events as neutral data before applying personal meaning. Most people speak, act, and react from their own programming. They're not thinking about you as much as you think. When someone is rude, impatient, or critical, their behavior is a mirror of their internal world, not yours. Emotional detachment teaches you to observe behavior like a scientist, noting it, understanding it, and responding strategically rather than emotionally. This shift not only protects your peace, but gives you the upper hand in most situations. Another way to reinforce detachment is to stop personalizing everything. The human ego craves attention and validation. So, when it feels insulted, ignored, or dismissed, it tends to respond with anger, offense, or sadness. Emotional detachment means bypassing the ego's need for drama. It's about choosing stability over volatility. This doesn't mean suppressing your voice or opinions. You can still be assertive, have boundaries, and express yourself, but you do so without emotional dependence on how others react. Also, emotional detachment is not the same as emotional suppression. Suppression is unhealthy, it's pushing emotions down until they explode later. Detachment is different. It involves observing the emotion without judgment and making a conscious choice about how to respond. This kind of emotional intelligence is what separates mature individuals from reactive ones. It's what allows leaders, professionals, and refined individuals to maintain composure in difficult circumstances. An often overlooked element of emotional detachment is the protection of your energy. Every time you get emotionally involved in something unworthy, petty arguments, negative gossip, someone's bad mood, you are spending energy that could be used for creativity, self-growth, or peace. Emotional detachment is, in many ways, a form of self-respect. It means you value your inner world so much that you refuse to let just anyone pollute it. And so, over time, you become more selective with your focus, your time, and your attention. Practically speaking, cultivating emotional detachment involves a few consistent habits. First, adopt the practice of mindful observation. Watch your thoughts like clouds passing in the sky without getting carried away by them. Second, practice deep breathing or grounding techniques when you feel triggered. These methods activate the rational part of the brain and create a pause in your reaction cycle. Third, reflect daily. Ask yourself, where did I give away my peace today? Why? Was it worth it? This builds self-awareness and course correction. There is also power in developing a strong inner identity, one that is not shaken by others' moods, opinions, or approval. Emotional detachment thrives in people who have done the inner work of self-worth. When your sense of self comes from your values, your behavior, and your character, not from external validation, then other people lose their power to disturb you. You begin to see people's reactions as data points, not personal attacks. You stop absorbing everyone's emotional chaos as your own. In conclusion, emotional detachment is not an escape from emotions, but a mastery of them. It is the ability to remain centered and composed, even in the face of provocation, misunderstanding, or emotional chaos. It doesn't make you less human, it makes you a wiser human. You don't lose compassion, you gain clarity. You don't become passive, you become powerful, and most importantly, you don't numb yourself, you awaken to a higher level of self-control. Mastering this principle won't happen overnight, but with intention, awareness, and repetition, you'll begin to notice a profound shift. You will no longer feel shaken by small things or drained by difficult people. Instead, you will move through the world with grace, untouched, unmoved, and always in command of your own peace. One of the most liberating yet overlooked forms of emotional self-mastery is the ability to validate yourself from within. In a world that constantly seeks likes, approval, agreement, and applause, developing the skill of internal validation sets you apart. It empowers you to remain emotionally grounded and unaffected by the ever-changing opinions and expectations of others. When you validate yourself, you no longer rely on the external world to tell you who you are or how valuable you are, because you've already decided that for yourself. Let's begin with what internal validation actually means. It is the process of recognizing your own worth, trusting your own judgment, and being emotionally anchored in your own identity, regardless of whether others affirm you or not. It is the quiet, stable confidence that says, I am enough. I trust myself. I approve of who I am and the choices I make. This kind of inner approval allows you to act from self-respect rather than insecurity or the need for attention. Most people are taught from an early age to seek validation externally from parents, teachers, friends, and eventually society. Good grades, compliments, promotions, and praise are all external rewards that shape behavior. While some of this is necessary in childhood, problems arise when adults remain dependent on external feedback to feel secure. If your mood, confidence, or sense of self-worth rises and falls based on how others treat you, then you are emotionally fragile because your value is conditional and unstable. Internal validation changes this. It builds emotional independence. Instead of constantly asking, do they like me? Did I impress them? Did I do enough? You begin to ask, do I like who I was in that moment? Did I stay true to my values? Am I proud of how I handled that? The source of worth becomes internal rather than external. This shift transforms how you engage with the world. You become less anxious, less reactive, and more self-directed. One of the key outcomes of mastering internal validation is a strong sense of personal boundaries. When you don't need constant approval from others, you're more willing to say no when something doesn't align with your values. You no longer tolerate poor treatment just to keep the peace or win acceptance. You stop explaining or justifying your every move because your internal compass already affirms the integrity of your decisions. This creates a more confident and composed presence, one that quietly commands respect without demanding it. Let's consider a practical example. Imagine you voice an unpopular opinion in a group conversation. The externally validated person might shrink back, over-apologize, or feel uneasy if others don't agree. But the internally validated person can hold their position calmly without needing to convince everyone or be praised for their input. They know that agreement doesn't equal correctness and disagreement doesn't equal rejection. Their self-worth isn't tied to being liked or affirmed in every moment. This doesn't mean you become closed off to feedback or immune to improvement. On the contrary, internal validation gives you the strength to receive feedback without being defensive. Because your self-worth isn't threatened, you can evaluate criticism objectively, taking what's useful and discarding what isn't. That is real maturity, the ability to learn without losing yourself. Internal validation is what gives you that emotional resilience. To cultivate this trait, begin with self-awareness. Pay attention to when you're seeking approval. Do you post something online and feel anxious about likes? Do you need reassurance before making a decision? Do you feel uneasy if someone seems to disapprove of you? These are moments where internal validation is missing. Once you recognize the pattern, start shifting your focus inward. Ask yourself, what do I think of this? What feels true for me? Do I need them to agree, or can I stand firm on my own? Another powerful practice is affirming your own efforts and progress privately. You don't need to announce every success to be proud of it. Celebrate in silence. Congratulate yourself internally. Keep promises to yourself. These small acts build self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of internal validation. When you keep showing up for yourself, your confidence grows not because someone else noticed, but because you did. It's also important to know that internal validation helps you manage rejection and criticism with grace. When you truly validate yourself, you stop seeing rejection as a reflection of your worth. Not everyone will understand you, support you, or treat you fairly, and that's okay. Their reactions are shaped by their own beliefs, biases, and limitations. Internal validation allows you to observe those reactions without internalizing them. You stop making other people's opinions your emotional responsibility. This mindset brings a quiet power. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop overthinking every interaction. You stop bending your personality to suit the room. Instead, you remain centered, kind, but not needy, open, but not dependent. You become more intentional in your relationships, your decisions, and your goals. People may not always agree with you, but they will sense your clarity. That clarity is magnetic. It shows that you know who you are and you don't need a crowd to remind you. Of course, mastering internal validation doesn't happen overnight. It's a discipline that requires daily practice. You'll have moments of doubt, insecurity, or emotional temptation to seek outside approval. That's normal, but each time you pause and turn inward instead, you're reinforcing the habit of self-trust. You're training yourself to be emotionally self-sufficient, to be your own anchor in a world full of shifting tides, and this kind of inner strength pays dividends. You begin to approach life from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. You don't enter rooms hoping to be seen. You bring value because you already see yourself. You don't chase validation through overachievement, perfectionism, or people pleasing. You live in alignment with your values, and that alignment becomes your source of confidence. In summary, internal validation is not about arrogance or isolation. It's about owning your worth without waiting for someone else to confirm it. It's about developing a relationship with yourself that is so respectful and so reliable that outside approval becomes optional, not essential. You still appreciate kindness, support, and affirmation, but you don't depend on them. You don't fear disapproval or silence, because you know that who you are is already enough with or without applause. When you master the art of internal validation, you no longer live at the mercy of other people's opinions. You become the author of your emotional world, and in that space, anger, anxiety, and frustration lose their grip because nothing outside you can shake what's already been decided within. The ability to respond instead of react is one of the most powerful and transformative tools a person can develop, and it lies at the heart of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence isn't simply about understanding feelings, it's about managing them in a way that serves both yourself and others. When you respond instead of react, you gain the ability to choose your behavior consciously, regardless of how someone else is acting. This is a hallmark of strength, not passivity, and it sets emotionally mature people apart from those who are easily provoked or thrown off balance. Most people live in a reactive state without realizing it. They feel a stimulus, a rude comment, a stressful event, a dismissive tone, and immediately act based on emotion. Their facial expressions shift, their tone sharpens, or they withdraw in silence. These reactions are automatic and often based on habit, past experiences, or unresolved emotions. The issue with this is that reacting leaves no room for perspective. It's a knee-jerk response that often intensifies the situation or leads to regret later. Responding, by contrast, involves awareness and intention. It means that even when you feel triggered, you take a pause, mentally step back, and then choose how to handle the situation. The difference between the two can be subtle in action, but vast in effect. Reacting is impulsive, responding is considered. Reacting often creates chaos. Responding creates clarity. To begin shifting from reaction to response, it's necessary to become aware of your emotional triggers. These are situations, words, behaviors, or even tones of voice that instantly cause you to feel agitated, defensive, embarrassed, or angry. Emotional intelligence starts with identifying these patterns. You can't change what you don't see. Pay attention to when your body tightens, your breath shortens, or your thoughts become sharp and critical. These are signs that a reaction is forming. Once you're aware of a trigger, the next step is to pause. This pause, even just a few seconds, is incredibly powerful. In that space, you can ask yourself, what is really happening here? What am I feeling right now? Why does this bother me? Is my reaction based on the current moment, or is it tied to something older or deeper? That brief moment of reflection puts you back in control. You are no longer a puppet to your emotions, but the director of your actions. It's also helpful to shift your mindset during emotionally charged moments. Instead of taking things personally, practice reframing. For example, if someone speaks to you harshly, it's easy to react with anger or sarcasm. But with emotional intelligence, you might consider that they could be stressed, insecure, or simply unaware of their tone. This doesn't excuse poor behavior, but it allows you to respond with perspective rather than ego. You maintain your power instead of letting someone else's behavior dictate your emotional state. Another essential component of responding instead of reacting is understanding the long-term impact of your actions. A reaction might feel good in the moment you get to release tension or win an argument, but it often leads to regret, damaged relationships, or unnecessary conflict. A response, however, builds trust and respect. You demonstrate self-control, thoughtfulness, and maturity. People may not always agree with you, but they will respect your ability to stay composed. This composure is not about suppression. Suppressing emotions is unhealthy and leads to emotional buildup over time. Responding is about acknowledging emotions without being consumed by them. You allow yourself to feel frustration or disappointment, but you process it internally before choosing your words or behavior. It's the difference between letting the emotion drive the car versus placing it in the passenger seat while you stay at the wheel. Developing this ability takes practice, especially if you're used to reacting quickly. It helps to adopt grounding techniques that bring you back to the present moment. Deep breathing, counting to 5 before speaking, or physically relaxing your muscles can all help you pause before reacting. These simple acts calm the nervous system and activate the logical part of your brain, the part responsible for reasoned decisions. Over time, as you practice responding, you'll begin to notice a shift not just in yourself, but in how others treat you. You become more trustworthy, more approachable, and more influential. People learn that you are not easily rattled or manipulated, which changes the dynamic of your interactions. You earn quiet authority because people sense your emotional stability. Responding instead of reacting also strengthens your inner peace. When you are not constantly thrown off by others' behavior, you conserve energy. You no longer replay conversations in your head or feel the need to defend yourself endlessly. You say what needs to be said calmly, clearly, and with self-respect, and then you move on. That kind of emotional discipline creates freedom. You stop being emotionally hijacked by every disagreement, criticism, or unexpected change. Additionally, emotional intelligence fosters empathy, which is key to effective responses. When you understand that people act from their own level of consciousness, pain, or stress, you gain emotional distance from their behavior. You don't absorb their emotions as your own. You respond in a way that is appropriate but not emotionally entangled. This allows you to protect your peace while still being kind, firm, or assertive when necessary. Responding doesn't mean you never raise your voice or feel upset. It means that when you do, it's a choice, not a loss of control. You might express disagreement or enforce a boundary, but it's done from a place of clarity, not emotional chaos. You are using your emotion as data, not as a weapon, and that makes all the difference. In the end, choosing to respond instead of react is a commitment to your own growth. It is a daily discipline, one that requires patience, self-awareness, and humility. But with time, this becomes second nature. You no longer chase peace through control or perfection. You create peace by controlling yourself. That is the ultimate power: to remain steady in the midst of noise, to think clearly in the face of pressure, and to act intentionally rather than impulsively. This is what it means to live with emotional intelligence. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of awareness, not the denial of emotion, but the management of it. When you respond instead of react, you not only protect your energy, you elevate your entire experience of life. One of the most transformative decisions you can make for your emotional well-being is to raise the standard for what is allowed to affect you. This means becoming far more intentional about where you invest your emotional energy, and far more selective about which people, situations, or comments are worth your emotional attention. In a world filled with noise, distractions, and emotional provocations, choosing not to be easily disturbed is not just a preference, it's a sign of personal power. When you set a higher standard for what affects you emotionally, you no longer react to every small inconvenience or insensitive remark. You stop getting involved in petty conflicts, overanalyzing irrelevant details, or wasting time on people who drain you. This is not indifference, it's discernment. You begin to operate from a place of emotional maturity where not everything deserves a reaction and not everyone deserves your emotional involvement. People who are easily offended, constantly irritated, or quick to anger often live in a state of low emotional thresholds. Almost anything can trigger them because they haven't created clear internal filters. Everything is taken personally, every misunderstanding becomes a drama, every disagreement becomes a threat. But when you raise your standard, you train yourself to pause and ask, is this truly worth my peace? Is this person even operating at a level where their words should carry weight in my world? This is where emotional elevation begins, when you stop responding to everything that happens on the surface and start operating from a deeper level of self-control. One practical mindset to adopt is this: not everything is about me, and not everything requires me. When someone is passive, aggressive, dismissive, or opinionated, it often reflects their own internal state. Their mood, insecurities, or stress are spilling out, and they want a reaction to feel in control. If you meet them at that level, you've lowered yourself. But if you remain steady, unbothered, and focused, you've protected your emotional space. Raising your standard means acknowledging that your attention is a form of currency, and not everyone deserves to be paid. You begin to ask yourself, is this situation important? Does it deserve an emotional response? Will this matter a week from now? Am I acting out of pride or principle? Most of the time, you'll find that the things that initially spark emotion are temporary, insignificant, and not aligned with your higher self. The more you practice asking these questions, the less reactive you become. This is not to say you become detached from everything. In fact, raising your standard allows you to care more deeply about the things that actually matter: your goals, your growth, your values, and your closest relationships. By not wasting emotional energy on every external provocation, you have more space to invest in what truly enriches your life. You stop spreading yourself thin and start protecting your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Part of setting this standard is also learning to emotionally disqualify certain people from influencing you. Not everyone's opinion should hold emotional weight. Just because someone has something to say doesn't mean you need to listen, absorb, or react. Emotional maturity allows you to differentiate between constructive input and emotional noise. Some people speak from clarity, others from confusion. Some speak to build, others to provoke. When you raise your standard, you stop letting unqualified voices disturb your inner peace. To implement this, it helps to create mental filters, a form of internal criteria for what is allowed into your emotional world. For example, does this person know me well enough to make this judgment? Is this feedback coming from care or control? Is this problem a real threat or just an inconvenience? These filters help you protect your mental and emotional space without shutting down or becoming rigid. Another key point to understand is that emotional elevation is a practice, not a personality trait. You're not born with a high threshold for emotional disturbance. You develop it over time by disciplining your responses and training your mind to remain calm under pressure. One of the most effective ways to do this is through mental rehearsal. Imagine scenarios that might typically upset you and visualize yourself handling them with grace, detachment, and strength. This conditions your nervous system to respond differently the next time something challenging arises. Also, consider what kind of emotional legacy you want to leave behind. Do you want to be remembered as someone who was easily rattled, constantly upset, and emotionally reactive, or as someone who was grounded, centered, and emotionally unshakable? Every day you have opportunities to practice this. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when a colleague makes a sarcastic remark, when plans don't go as expected, these are small tests. They're not just annoyances, they are invitations to rise above. When you consistently choose peace over pride, perspective over pettiness, and power over reaction, you begin to transform your entire emotional experience. You stop being at the mercy of the world and start creating your own emotional climate. This doesn't mean you won't feel anger or frustration, but it means you won't be dominated by it. You'll notice the emotion, understand it, and decide whether or not it's worth engaging. That is mastery. One of the most important realizations you'll have along this journey is that peace is not something you find, it's something you protect. And to protect it, you must guard your emotional entry points. Not everyone gets access. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every situation requires your emotional participation. The higher your standard, the more selective you become, and the more selective you become, the more powerful you feel. In the end, setting a higher standard for what affects you emotionally is an act of self-respect. It's saying, my energy is too valuable to be wasted on nonsense. My time is too limited to be spent in emotional turmoil. My mind is too sharp to be distracted by trivialities. This is not arrogance, it's alignment. And when you live this way, you stop being someone who reacts to life and start being someone who directs it. In a world filled with unpredictable people, shifting opinions, and endless emotional triggers, the ability to remain unshaken is not only rare, it is essential. Learning how to never get angry or bothered by others is not about suppressing emotions or pretending nothing affects you. Rather, it is about building a strong inner framework, one based on self-awareness, internal validation, emotional intelligence, and higher standards for what deserves your attention. When you detach your sense of worth from the behavior of others, you no longer live in reaction. You live in response. By cultivating self-respect, you don't seek validation from those who cannot give it. You trust yourself first. You begin to understand that emotional control isn't about forcing yourself to be calm, it's about choosing not to be pulled into chaos that doesn't belong to you. Each of the principles explored: observing before reacting, validating yourself from within, using emotional intelligence, and raising your standard for emotional involvement offers a clear path toward unshakable peace. These are skills, not traits. They are habits you can strengthen through daily intention, and with each small choice you reclaim your power. You are not here to be emotionally swayed by every opinion, insult, or mood swing around you. You are here to live with clarity, grounded in your own values and protected by your own discipline. The goal is not to avoid life's challenges, but to meet them with such steadiness that they no longer define you. When you reach this place where you can stay calm in discomfort, kind in tension, and firm without being aggressive, you have achieved something truly rare: the power to be the master of your own emotions, regardless of what others do. And that, more than anything, is what it means to be unbothered.